Once again, the lessons for today are relatively painful. I'd like to meet the committee that picks them. Thank God you made them sound palatable anyway. But read the part of the gospel that I did not read. It's, I don't know. But the problem is, so much of religion is about what we should not do. For example, in the first lesson for today, Moses, who is obviously having a bad day, says, I declare to you that you shall perish, and you shall not live long in the land that you're crossing the Jordan to get into. And so I call heaven and earth to witness against you today. If I said that to you, you wouldn't come back next Sunday. But then finally, at the end of the lesson, he says, choose life. Choose life that you and your descendants might live. I realize more and more life is not about what we should not do. Life is about what we should do. Whenever we do something with the youth group, whether it's bowling or McDonald's today, or a weekend retreat, or a week at Heartland Children's Home, we only have one rule, and that is respect. You know, when I was younger, and whenever we went on a retreat or something, I always gave the kids a list of all the stuff you shouldn't do. Don't mess up the bus. Don't smoke. Don't drink. La-da-da-da-da. And now there's only one rule: respect. Because when you have respect in your heart, when respect is at the very fiber of your being, then you don't do stuff that hurts other people. It's about choosing life. It's about choosing what's best. It's about choosing what is good and decent, and not just for me, but for everybody around me. Speaking of respect and choosing life, I think one of the hardest things for me to do, and I can only speak for myself, is to take the time to listen to somebody else. We all know people, and oftentimes that person is me, who love to talk. They love to share. They love to give their opinions. They love to see what they want to see. But they are totally oblivious to what's inside your heart. They like to talk, but they don't like to listen. And that is oftentimes me. And this is not a big thing, but you know, for years, you have been telling me, mostly gently, that the coffee I make is too strong. And I would flippantly say, if you want weak coffee, go up to Shell or Gas City. They have lots of it. And lately, because that was my New Year's resolution, I talked about it on New Year's Day, was to put less grounds in the coffee. And over the last 3 or 4 weeks, many of you have said to me, Don, who's making the coffee now? And then I did something last week that really makes me feel old. You've been telling me, on Thursday night, Don, it's 8 o'clock, people are ready to go to bed, would you please make decaf coffee? And I did. And when I cleaned up afterwards, most of the coffee was gone. Why? Because for the first time in 43 years, I listened to you. You see, Jesus was a listener. It's easy to quote Jesus. Preachers love to put words into Jesus' mouth. But the most important thing Jesus did was listen to the heartbeat of other people, and that dictated what he said and what he did. The leper, the outcast, the lonely. He even listened to the people who eventually killed him, because that's who Jesus was. I've been thinking a lot lately about listening to God, about wishing that God somehow answered prayers more directly, that somehow wishing that God's voice was louder and more clear. There are many signs of getting older, and maybe serving decaf is one of them. Have you ever dialed somebody to talk to them, and when they answer the phone, you forgot who you called? Have you ever talked to somebody for a while and you still can't figure out who you're talking to? I mentioned on Thursday I was kind of in a hurry to get home to see Quentin before coming back to church, and the phone rang. And he said, Don, this is Chris. How have you been? I said, well, good. How are you doing, Chris? He says, well, I'm living in Florida, and I have a new job, and I did go through a divorce, but I need your advice on something. I'm thinking, who in the heck is this? I'm giving advice to someone I don't even know who's on the phone. And he says, my mom just passed away. I'm going to the funeral home. I need to ask you a few questions. I need some advice. And I'm starting to panic. And then he finally said, remember when you used to come and have a beer at Silver Lake Country Club when I was the bartender? I said, now I know who you are. Mention a local bar, and it comes right there. And I said, Chris, how are you? He says, Don, you sound different. And I said, I just figured out who you are. But I knew there was something about his voice, but it took me 3 or 4 minutes to hear him. And somehow the conversation got to me. It got to me on Thursday night at the Jewel, and it got to me yesterday at GFS because we were out of coffee. And so just before I had to do a funeral, I thought I'd stop into GFS quickly and get some coffee and creamer. And there was a line with just one other person ahead of me. And I had to get to the funeral, but the person ahead of me was older, had a walker and a hearing aid, and he was having trouble finding his checkbook. And then when he found his checkbook, he couldn't find a box big enough to fit his stuff in, and he couldn't carry it with his walker. And so I finally went up and said, would you like some help? Because I got to get the heck out of here. And then I realized the other day when I was talking to Chris, I wasn't listening. And it took me a while to hear. And yesterday in GFS, with an elderly gentleman in front of me, I wasn't listening. Because somehow, some way, in this elderly gentleman, God was speaking to me, saying, Don, it's so silly for you to be in a hurry. Why is it always about you? It's about him, trying to get to his car, trying to find his checkbook. And Don, why don't you step back and take a back seat, and will the world come to an end if you're 9 minutes late for your funeral? Because somehow, some way, in an ordinary moment at GFS, God is speaking to me, and I am not listening. I realize that speaking to God, and God speaking to us, and somehow listening to God's voice, I'm not even sure what that means. But do you ever go back and reflect on your journey and your life? I was thinking of my seminary years, 4 years in the seminary, and some of the stuff I tried to learn, and how much of that stuff makes no difference at all today. I look back at some of my old sermons the other day, and I was thinking to myself, Don, what were you thinking when you preached that? I think of my journey here, and you think of yours. Some of the stuff I get obsessed about, some of the stuff I worry about. I think of the daily stuff, the broken sump pumps, to losing people we love. And I'm thinking, Lord, help me listen more. Help me step back and look at the ordinary moments, because that ordinary moment just might be our burning bush. An old man trying to find his checkbook. Maybe a pot of coffee with 2 less scoops. And I realize anew that when we take the time to listen to someone else's heart song, that makes our heart song louder and richer too. Amen. If you're able to, please rise for the creed. It's on page 105.